We'll start off today with going through an overview of our system here. We'll give you an understanding of some of the SAP terminology, how the different pieces of the system fit together so that we have an understanding of just the core components. And then we will step into talking about the core SAP services, the SLD, which is the system landscape directory, which is kind of the mastermind of the system. This is what controls licensing, company backups, identity management, and many other things. Then we'll get into the remote support platform. The remote support platform is SAP's tool for remote monitoring, basic system diagnostics, and it's also our gateway for accessing SAP support when we run into any issues. Then we'll get into the really good stuff. We'll get into HANA Studio, which is our graphical user interface for administering HANA, similar to Microsoft SQL Studio for people who are familiar with the SQL environments. And in HANA Studio, we can monitor the database. We can do some administration tasks. And then finally, we'll touch on SUSE Linux. How do we get into the system to get some vital server information and how to monitor and restart core server tools. We've got quite a lot on our agenda today, so we will be moving quite fast, but we will make these recordings available afterwards for everyone to access as well. Thanks, Chris. Can you move on to the next slide there? All right, we'll do some introductions. Hi, I'm Cameron Fisher. I'm the Director of Technical Services at Aclaros. And my colleague here, Curtis Boudreau, who will be going through most of our presentation today, is one of our senior technical consultants. Curtis has been with us for about 8 years, and before that, he was a systems administrator at a company running SAP. And I think Curtis was involved in one of the very first HANA implementations in Canada. So he's been there right from the beginning. So he brings many years of professional IT experience, and he is our HANA subject matter expert. Then myself, I've been with Aclaros for about 9 years. I manage a team here of technical developers and consultants, and my teams are responsible for technical implementations and monitoring and managing of systems and ongoing support, as well as customization and development work that we implement and offer at Aclaros. All right, thanks, Curtis. I'm going to hand it over to you now, and we can get into the good stuff.
All right, thank you, Cameron, and welcome to everybody who's joining us today. And I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your days to be here with us. We're going to be talking, as Cameron mentioned, about the management of SAP Business One version for SAP HANA landscapes through client-side IT teams and systems that can be, it can be complex, and especially when you're dealing with the scale requirements and other customizations to meet your company's unique business objectives. So I'm going to be taking this opportunity to provide you with an introduction to the SAP Business One HANA systems and try to peel back a little bit of the curtain so that you can see how the services are working behind the scenes. So as you can see here, here's a typical landscape deployment map. First and foremost, SAP HANA is the database, and this runs on a Linux operating system distribution such as SUSE or even Red Hat. Since version 2.0 of HANA, the database allows isolated databases or tenants to run on a single HANA instance. So we know this as a multi-tenant environment. And in other words, you can have one piece of shared land, one or more private houses, each having their own isolated rooms. In any case, all SAP HANA installations will have a system database and at least one tenant database. A tenant database can house as many company schemas as you need, and these schemas are where the private company data lives. So the terminology is a little bit different from what you might be used to if you're on the Microsoft SQL side of things, where the term database can be used to refer to a place where the company lives or company data lives. So in most landscape deployments for Business One, there's typically 3 services for SAP that are made available. First, there's the B1 Server Tool service, which is a group of tools that includes the SLD. More on this in a little bit. And some folks who might holistically refer to this as the set of tools, the SLD, but that's not entirely accurate. So, we're going to touch on, or we're going to expand a little bit more into that in a little bit. So then we have the service layer, which is the new API service, and that also runs on Linux servers. And then finally, the most recent, probably the biggest addition to the group of services is the new B1 Web Gateway Client service. And so this also runs on Linux. So as we can see, a lot of Linux heavy services, not so much on the Windows side. That's only for this HANA installation landscape that we're talking, okay? Now, of course, these services can run together on the same server that the HANA database is installed on, or they can be distributed across multiple servers. And this really depends on your deployment strategy. So when we have the remote support platform installed, the integration framework and under any other third-party services, these are typically run from a Windows host machine. So for the presentation layer, the traditional B1 client is installed on a Windows workstation or a terminal server. The client will connect over the network to the services layer and the database layer. As of Business One version 10, each layer should be connecting over a public signed SSL. Now, finally, the new B1 web client can be launched securely from any modern web browser. And I personally prefer Google Chrome for all of my devices. So we're going to take a little bit of a closer look into the SLD, otherwise known as the System Landscape Directory service. Now, the SLD is a centralized admin tool that provides a clear overview of the system that's been installed and configured. And from the SLD web app, you can manage and monitor most of the SAP Business One components and services, gathering and reviewing logs, and so much more. Now, the server tool service, this one is comprised of multiple service engines, all under the same hood. The SLD service, this would include things like the B1's license service, the extension manager, the job service, and of course, the HANA Analytics Enablement service. Other services that are deployed independently, but also managed, or at least being able to be managed through the SLD web app. And these would be the things like the B1 service layer, the web client gateway, and of course, the new identity management services. And so what all of this does, these services all are what brings SAP Business One to life. So let's take a look at a pre-recorded demo of the SLD in action. So the SLD is a service typically installed on the same host as the SAP HANA database. But in multi-tenant installations, it can be installed on its own dedicated SUSE Linux host machine. And as you can see, the SLD app, web app really, is accessed through a web browser. And we can see here how we log into the SLD using the B1 server credential or B1 site user credentials. And since B1 10.0, it's been a best practice to deploy your landscapes with fully qualified domain names rather than specific host names or IP addresses. So what we can see here is that the structure of the URL is going to be HTTPS, fully qualified domain name, port 40,000, /control center. Now that we're logged in, you can see a list of the database instances that are part of the landscape. Typically, we're just going to have one. Now, once you click on the database instance, the list of company schemas are populated. Using the SLD, you can create company-specific exports, which then can be used as imports so that you can make copy for testing or maybe even for development copies of your schemas. And you can also review the database configurations so that you can take quick instance backups from this SLD web app. Now let's take a look and we're going to watch how to use the tool to be able to export and import one of the demo databases, in this case, the SBO demo schema. And I'm just going to make a quick note here for everybody. The exported company files that are stored in a specific schema folder, these are automatically named with a date and a timestamp on the file server inside of the Linux host machine. This way, when you use the import schema function from the SLD, you can easily find and choose which date and time of the specific company schema that you want to restore from. Also, what we're going to make a quick mention about is making sure to follow SAP's naming best practices, right? So you want to use best practices for schema naming. And these would be things like saying that you want to have your schema all in uppercase, no special characters, numbers and letters only, and try to keep it less than 20 characters. Now, personally, I like to prefix my company schemas with SBO, and that way I can easily identify the schema as being one of the SAP Business One schemas. So here on screen, what we're watching is the import functionality and making a schema copy. And as you can see, I have the prefix SBO, and it just gives it a nice little name so that we're able to quickly identify what the imported file is. And then we can also see on screen the way that we can identify the status of the import and export, if it's being imported or if it's being exported, if it's already completed, and so forth and so on. And what we also are going to notice here is that after we've done an import, the company name remains the same as the schema that we had imported from. So just make sure that after you've done that, you do log into the company database and change that company name inside of the database so that you don't have people coming up to you and saying, hey, why am I connecting into the wrong database, right? So just keep an eye on that one. So also from this view, as we can see here, we can check the log file details. And this is good just in case there was like an error during any of the function changes, like the import or the export. And maybe there was like a failure message, things that we want to be able to see inside so that we can do a full review. It's nice that we can do a copy and paste of that log file so that we can put it into Notepad, use word wrap, make it easy to read, and then easily identify situations. You know, if the company's been imported recently, if it's been exported recently, if there's been any errors, if it's been successful, where those files are getting stored, so forth and so on. All right. Now in this demo here, we're going to be exploring some of the other managed services in the SLD web app. First, we'll take a look at the service layer controller. Now the service layer, as I mentioned earlier, is the new API which can be used for integrations and third-party add-ons and solutions. Now in simpler terms, the SAP Business One service layer opens up your SAP Business One system functions, allowing for software and applications to talk to it and work together seamlessly. This integration capability can significantly boost your efficiency, the automation processes, and accessibility for your business processes. Now we can monitor the service layer, stop and start nodes, add and remove nodes, and of course, manage access logs, etc. And as we can see here, we got some configuration areas that we can modify just to stick with some SAP business best practices, you know, changing the log level to error only and the timeout period, etc. Now, next, we're going to take a look at the job service. Now, a lot of us already know what the job service is, but to explain a little bit more in depth, the job service is a service that's responsible for sending emails, running scheduled alerts, things like that. Now, SMTP details can be configured here, and this is used if the company-specific SMTPs are not being used. In the companies list, you can control, back in the SLD main page, general page, you can see that there's the list of all the company schemas, and this is where you can control whether or not the SMTP alerts or emails are being enabled per schema. And then inside of the company databases specifically, you can log in and set a company specific SMTP if that's what you need to do. Now, for example, for some sandboxes and maybe test schemas, you don't enable the alerts or the emails. And this is the way, emails aren't being sent to customers or vendors accidentally while you're doing testing. So as we can see here, this is how we easily use the SLD web app to be able to toggle on and off the alert or email features for the available company schemas in the database. Right, so very simple, very accessible. Now, just as a tip, if either the mailer or the alerts are suddenly not delivering messages, and you've already made sure that the SMTP details are correct and up to date, of course, then restarting the services is just as easy as we can see here by restarting the service. And this is a really good first line attempt to resolve the issue. All right, moving on. We're going to talk about the remote support platform service. So what is the RSP? Well, this is the tool. This is like a background tool that we can use to be able to automate the maintenance tasks and database or schema health checkups, as well as monitoring our systems and current health status, things like that. So using the RSP console, it really provides us with the necessary tools to be able to support the environments and ensure that your system is in line with the SAP End User License Agreement, or the EULA. It also has a few super helpful functions that we're going to take a look at together. Now, just a quick reminder, the RSP console typically runs on a Windows host server. In smaller deployments, though, it can be installed on a Microsoft Windows client PC running Windows 10 or later. So just keep that in mind. In the background, the RSP agent service, this one connects to the HANA database where the RSP schema is deployed during the installation of the RSP. We don't see that the RSP schema exists when we're in the SLD because the SLD and the RSP have nothing to do with each other. It's not an SAP Business One database. It's its own schema that resides on the SAP HANA tenant database. Now, here we're going to take a look and we're going to see how we can connect into the RSP console client from a Windows PC. Now remember, the RSP is used for by SAP for several purposes, mostly relating to your support. Whoops. Let me just go back there. Now we're going to be discussing this more in detail a bit later about how SAP does leverage the details coming out of your RSP system. Right, so during the installation of the RSP agent, the credentials are set up when the system is installed. And if just in case the system credentials have been forgotten, it's really easy and possible to be able to reset these using your database system user credentials. Now, when we first log into the console, we have to make sure that the configurations are completed successfully. But in this case, I'm just going to skip it because this is just a demo. So as you can see here, the list of the available company schemas should appear. Now, just a small note on that one. The green lights mean that it's good. Red lights mean that it's bad. Pretty standard, straightforward. Now, these are the tasks that are generally activated at all times. These tasks are the system status report, the task retrieval, the task upload, and the system maintenance tasks. We're going to talk a little bit more in a bit about the system status report task. Now, unless you're running SAP Business One for Microsoft SQL, the database backup and restore tasks, which you might see, well, those ones should remain inactive in that task list. Now, from the active task list window, you can configure any of the highlighted tasks, just like we can see here, so that you can change the task execution schedule or even customize the emailed alerts so they're delivered to a specific person for specific task results, right? And you can also execute a task that when you do execute the task, rather, you'll likely see a pop-up window which asks you which company schemas the tasks should be executed against. Okay, and we can see what's occurring once the task is being executed. Now, one of the really helpful functions from the RSP Studio that I mentioned earlier is that it gives us the option and the ability to manage our database instance backups automatically using the backup management tool. When the RSP backup is enabled for your HANA environment, you can then use the backup management tool to configure automated instance backups and execute them on a defined schedule. When you're configuring the backup manage task, make sure that your backup service is available, of course, right? We can see that in the green text there that says backup service is available, or maybe it'll say backup service is unavailable. If it's not available, it's not going to work out so well for you. So just make sure it's green. In an instance backup, when an instance backup has been executed, you can use the backup history report to be able to check up on the backup results and see what's been captured and not captured. And we can see that next to the backup strategy tab here. In this case, as a demo, there's no existing SLD backups that's been captured or RSP backups that's been captured. So that's going to show up blank. We're going to be using this tool only for the instance backups. I'm suggesting that you leave the company schema backups and automation of your schema exports to the SLD tool itself. Now, just in case there is a HANA backup failure alert that's sent, indicating to you that there's been an instance backup missed, or maybe it's been, the backup wasn't successful for several days. Well, this is going to cause the RSP agent service to be needing to be restarted. So if this is the case, you get that alert, then just check to make sure that your RSP service is restarted. So just manually go through that process using the Windows Services Manager console as shown here. You can use the Task Manager in case the RSP service doesn't stop successfully when you want it to. So you can just go into Task Manager, right click and kill that task. So we can see how we can identify exactly what the file name is so that we can kill the right service from within the Task Manager details. So we're going to basically walk through this together just to see how we can recover from a failed RSP service, just pretending that we have to restart that service to make sure that the backups are executing again. Now, just to make a quick final note on this, if the RSP agent service does need to be restarted, go back into your RSP console, go into your backup configuration, and make sure that the backup schedule is set, because sometimes it gets unset when you restart the RSP agent service. Now, as mentioned a little bit earlier, we're going to take a quick peek inside of what the system status report, or the SSR, sometimes we call it, has inside of it, right? So the system status report, it's recommended to be executed at least once a week, maybe a little bit less, but we do it every week to be able to make sure that the data is uploaded to SAP, and the SSR task upload to SAP is required as part of your EULA, right? And it's absolutely needed before your SAP partners can request support from SAP. Because if SAP doesn't know what you have in your system, they won't provide any support. Now, a huge benefit of the SSR delivery is that it also gives your SAP partners and consultants the right to use a special support user on your behalf. What this means is that when we log into your company databases, we don't need to consume one of your licensed user accounts. We can use a special built-in user that doesn't borrow or steal one of your SAP Business One user licenses. Now, rest assured, all of the support actions or activities are logged comprehensively inside of the database. Now, I know a lot of you have been holding out for this one, but we're going to dive a little bit into the HANA Studio. So I think most of us, we know what the HANA Studio is. For those of us who aren't yet familiar with it, I'm just going to give you a quick technical description. The HANA Studio Application is available for Windows, Linux, and for Mac OS. It's an Eclipse-based IDE tool used for developing and administering SAP HANA databases. And you can use the tool to monitor the server and the database health, as well as perform debugging and performance analysis. Now, on top of this, you can also use the application to create data models, cubes, and even create web apps for the SAP HANA database. This is basically your Swiss Army knife for SAP HANA database management. Now we're going to be taking a look at the HANA Studio client in a second, but before this, I just want to revisit the HANA database server deployment. As mentioned at the start, the HANA database is typically deployed in a multi-tenant structure. This means that we have a system database, aka the database services orchestrator, and the tenant databases. The tenant databases, this is where all the company schemas and the data actually resides. Now think of it like this. Okay, you have a plot of land, you have 3 apartment buildings on that land. One is where your building management lives, the other 2 are where the landlords and the residents live, right? Of course, the building manager knows where and that there's other buildings where residents live, but they don't know anything about the residents, nor what's inside of their apartments. They leave that up to the landlords, right? On top of this, only the residents know what's inside of their apartments. This is kind of like what a HANA multi-tenanted database landscape is. The plot of the land is the HANA database, right? The system DB, that's the building maintenance team. And then the tenant database, I'm going to call that guy the landlord. And then, of course, the residents are where the company data actually exists, which I'm going to call this company schemas. All right, now enough about real estate. Let's get back to business. Now in HANA Studio, as we're going to see here, the first time that we connect, we're going to need to set up a connection profile. So we're going to specify the server name, the tenant database, the port, the username, and of course the password. And these details can all be provided to you for your specific systems. Now, we're going to typically set up a user profile for the system database first, and then we'll set up the tenant database. So let's go ahead and we're going to take a look at how this is all done. Right, so we're going to add our first system. So we click on the add, and then we're going to add in our host name. And again, this is a fully qualified domain name, just so that we have that full SSL security. So work with your networking team once you have to get that FQDN set up and your DNS updated and all that kind of good stuff. So again, we're going to be choosing the multiple containers, and then the system database is our first system that we're going to add. So then we log in with our system database user credentials, aptly named system. And this would be related to, if you're in the SQL world, and the SA user, right? And then the next thing that we can do after we've successfully added the system user is we're going to add in our first tenant database, right? So in this case, because it's a demo, I've aptly named my company scheme or my tenant database demo, right? We can add in a description so that we know what we're logging into, because as we said, this is our Swiss Army knife. We can have a whole bunch of tenant databases or even a whole bunch of instance databases, right? So keep in mind, this is a one size fits all kind of a tool for us. Now, let's talk about the system database. This doesn't contain any company specific details. It's related to the system setup and the management of the tenant databases themselves. There's no transaction data inside of this schema or this tenant data or this database, right? The tenant databases, they contain the company schemas, which contain, of course, the company data. This contains things like your transactional data. And of course, this should be backed up regularly, right? Now, inside of the HANA Studio administration cockpit here, we can see that we can take a look at a high level of what services are running, what's the back end of the server. We can find the host name. Everything that we really need to find out is pretty much on the screen. We can also see how much consumed memory is there, how much CPU is being consumed, disk space, all of that kind of good stuff, right? Now, as we also can see on the screen, if you notice at the top right there, is we can actually see if there's been any current or historical alerts, right? So we can go ahead and view our active alerts. And when you view the HANA active alerts, this is per tenant database. So when you open that up, you can also take a look at your ports, which your tenant database is running on as well. So as I said, kind of a nice little Swiss Army knife tool here. Now, let's talk about the instance backup once more, because I can't get enough of talking about backups. Using the HANA Studio, you can manage the instance backups using the backup console. This one is found in the system DB, right? You manage your backups from the system DB, not from each tenant database. Now, between full backups, database systems, of course, they store transaction logs so that you can recover to a point in time as it's possible. And of course, if it's ever really needed. Now, once a full backup is taken, all transaction logs will be truncated and then deleted. Now, if a full instance backup fails for an extended period of time, then the transaction logs really can begin to grow huge or consume up a whole lot of your disk space on your Linux server. And then, of course, what you're going to expect is that once the drive runs out of space, it's going to be really difficult to correct and could potentially cause and result in data loss if the system is not safely corrected before you restart the HANA services, right? Now, monitoring alerts and drive space is critical for this exact reason. And it's also really good practice to be able to make sure that you're not just holding on to too many historical instance backups. Using the backup management console, you can safely delete any of those unnecessary and unneeded backup files and their corresponding files from the Linux host server. Never delete them directly from the Linux server, only use the backup console from within the HANA Studio client. Now, if a full instance backup has failed, you can take backups from the HANA database, or HANA Studio rather. And you must be logged into the system database in order to execute the manual instance backup for the tenant databases. Now, of course, there's multiple types of backups that we can take here. I'll just run through them really quickly. Now, there's 3 types of instance backups that you can capture with the backup management console in HANA Studio: complete, differential, and incremental. And the complete backup, this one provides the database with a specific point in time. This can serve as the baseline for differential and incremental backups. The differential backup, this one provides only the data that's changed since the last complete backup. And of course, this is faster, but it requires a lot more disk space since you need to hold on to both the complete and the latest differential backup files. Now, the incremental, the third option, the incremental backup, this one only backs up the data that's changed since the last backup of any type, be it complete, differential, or incremental. This is the fastest backup type since it only copies the least amount of data. It also requires the least amount of storage space, of course, than even a differential does. Now, however, to recover with an incremental backup, you must restore all of those incremental backup files and the baseline complete backup file. So if you were to accidentally miss an incremental backup file somehow, maybe it got deleted, I don't know how, maybe it did, that's going to make it very, very challenging to be able to recover. So of course, this backup time has the most overhead in terms of file and backup management for your IT teams. All right, finally, it's the sysadmin's turns. Let's all talk about Linux. This is the enterprise grade distribution of Linux that's been optimized and certified by SAP for running the HANA in-memory database. It includes specific tooling needed for the SAP Business One services. Now, the SAP HANA database, this runs on a SUSE Linux server, of course. And I want to make mention here that yes, SAP does support Red Hat Linux as well as SUSE. There are no major functional differences between SUSE and Red Hat when it comes to running SAP HANA databases. Both distributions are certified and of course supported by SAP for running HANA. SUSE offers an installation workflow for guided installation of the operating system and SAP applications. And it also includes additional components that are tailored specifically for SAP environments. Red Hat, on the other hand, it doesn't have as many of these specific SAP components and tools that SUSE is offering, right? So just in terms of performance for HANA, both distributions are optimized, and there's really no significant difference. Really, the choice depends on your existing skill sets and, of course, the support contracts that you get with your vendors and the integration of the rest of your infrastructure, okay? So let's dig in a little bit more. By default, the main interface that we're going to be using to connect to the SUSE server is a terminal session. In other words, we shouldn't be connecting directly to the host server desktop, right? Rather, we should be using a remote console. Now, there's a graphical user interface available, which is your VNC or your RDP services, but these aren't set up by default. So they have to be set up by your sysadmin if that's what you want to use. I don't recommend it. It does have a heck of a lot of overhead. So for me, I like to access the terminal session using a free utility called PuTTY. And PuTTY, of course, is just a client program for the SSH, Telnet, RLogin, SUP, DUP network protocols, right? So we're going to log in with different server credentials. Usually different users might have different permissions. And as we know, the root user is the highest level user. We don't recommend using this root user profile because, you know, no more than what we would recommend using the administrator or even the domain administrator user profile to log into your Windows servers. We don't recommend you logging in using your root user. In this example, I'm going to. But we're going to be able to use this so that we can just see the df-ht command, which is a nice little tool that we can use to be able to view available drive space. Now, of course, this is one of the most common issues that we see, and I'm just going to make a quick mention of it, is that systems run out of disk space or partition space due to a lack of housekeeping, right? And this can happen for a variety of reasons. So really basically regular monitoring just to run this quick tool command, the df-ht, is really important to be able to just regularly ensure that there's no data loss or disruption for your SAP services. You don't have to run it every 15 minutes, but maybe like once a week, or, you know, if you're having some questions, just check in every so often, you know, every couple of days or so, right? Doesn't take too long to check, and it really keeps your mind at rest. And of course, you're going to use the PuTTY terminal session so that you can view and access log files for various SAP services. Now, the path locations to all of these log files is really well documented in SAP's admin guides, but because there's just so many, I'm not going to be able to show them today. All right. But what I will mention is a slightly common issue in certain versions of SAP Business One server tools. And this is where the Linux server or services might halt or crash. And this will result in users not being able to log into Business One or their company schemas. Pardon me. They might report getting an error about the SLT being unavailable, or maybe the license service cannot be reached, you know, things like that. Usually this is caused by the server tools running out of memory, or one of the embedded B1 server tools mentioned earlier, like the service layer, has encountered a critical error, right? Now, quickly, what we can do is we can leverage the system CTL utility to be able to view the status, or even stop and then restart the server tools, or any of the other SAP Business One server services as well, like the service layer service, or even the web client service, right? Now, the system CTL is just a command line utility in Linux that's used to manage and control the systemd system and the service manager. It provides a centralized way to be able to manage your services, replacing the older service and chk config commands, right? Just in case anybody has some historical Linux experience. Right, so as we can see here, as long as I can actually type properly and spell things properly, we can actually just use the systemctl status to be able to check up on different services. And these, as I mentioned, is the SAP B1 server tools, the B1 service layer, which is the B1s.service, and then of course the B1 web client, which is the web client service. All right, so this is going to be it for me, and huge shout out to all of you who are still here with me, and I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for your interest in all of these topics, and I'm going to pass this on to Cameron. So thanks again, everybody, and Cameron, back to you.
All right. Video back on you. Thanks, Curtis. Thanks for running us through that. And then next, we'll just open up here for some questions and answers. If anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and type them into the webinar, into Zoom here. We'll give you a minute to put in any questions that you may have. And we'll keep an eye on that if we see any questions come up. But while we wait, if people are thinking, some of the typical kinds of questions that we may get around the HANA administration, questions like offsite backups. And we didn't really talk too much yet about offsite backups. I know Curtis talked a lot about backups because backups are critical for everybody. We don't want to lose our data. We can set up offsite backups and numerous ways to do this. We can take the SAP instance backups, or you can take those schema backups that the SLD generates, company specific. So maybe you're just backing up your production data to an offsite location. If you take your instance backups, you're taking all of your schemas, all your production, all your sandboxes, all your demo databases, all of those things. So you may not need all of that to be taken offsite, just your production databases. Typical way of doing that, it's possible to log in through the SSH session that Curtis showed there, to logging in on the PuTTY terminal. It's possible to use client tools like WinSCP to log into an FTP session onto your terminal server to copy them down, or of course, set up scripts on your Linux host machine to take those backups that the RSP generates or the SLD generates and move them off to a third-party location, either on your own network or somewhere remotely on a third-party location. Don't see any questions in yet. I'm sure everyone's thinking very hard. And then some other questions that we get, when typical kinds of questions that come in when people are doing housekeeping tasks, as Curtis mentioned earlier, is if we find a lot of backups on the system, can we go and delete those backups directly in the operating system? Answer is instance backups, anything that's been managed by HANA Studio or the RSP, those should never be deleted directly from the operating system, because the HANA database keeps track, the system database keeps track of where all of those backup locations are. And every time that the HANA system starts up, it does an integrity check and goes and looks on the hard drive for all of those things. And if it's missing one, it will sit there and it'll throw you errors and it'll say, where are these backups? These backups are missing. So management of backup files for instance backups and log backups only managed through HANA Studio. The SLD backups, the schema specific backups, those are not managed in HANA Studio. Those can be moved. But again, it's also best to leave that up to the SLD to manage those backups. We will also, I don't see any questions coming in yet. We do sometimes get questions about high availability configurations. That might be a topic for a future webinar. There's a lot to dive into with high availability. The term high availability is used very, very loosely, and it can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different systems. So if you have any questions about that, you can send them over to us. Oh, I see a question here from Simon. What would be the cause of the error critical cache refresh failure causing B1 client to terminate? Critical cache refresh failure. This is usually HANA running out of memory. This is usually the result of the HANA server either exceeding its licensed amount of memory. So maybe we've got one license block. I don't think we really talked about it earlier, but HANA is licensed in blocks of memory, and it's multiples of 64 gigabytes of memory. So let's say you have the smallest configuration, which is 64 gigabytes of memory, and your database is just the data that the database is running. Maybe that's using up 30 gigs of data. And then if you're running really high intensity reports or analytical views or models, those can also consume additional memory on top to execute those queries. And if that pushes over your licensed or your system or the available system memory, you can sometimes end up getting that critical cache refresh failure because basically the system has run out of memory to execute the function. Thanks for the question.
So just one more addition onto that, Cameron, is that sometimes the critical cache refresh failure may also be not just HANA database side induced, but it may also be induced from a network failure as well. So it could be that maybe there was a blip in the Wi-Fi or the network. It's not as common in that respect, but it is something that we have seen being caused, especially in older generation databases like the SQL databases of things. But in the HANA side of things, yes, Cameron mentioned that it's more than likely that it is related to the system memory or the system resource consumption from the HANA database side. But again, it could just be something that is related to the client network side as well.
I think that there are certain instances that the client operating system, the Windows machine where the client is running, if that runs out of memory, you can also get the critical cache error if the Windows machine has run out of memory. Yeah. Right. Unless there are any other questions. Oh, there's a big one. We have an MSP manage the backup process for us. They are a Windows shop. Would there be a concise list of tools or procedures that would be of help to them in order to ensure that we do not have any space issues, as an example? I'm not sure what tools they use at the moment and would be interested in providing them with useful alternatives. So I think the question here is what monitoring tools are available for checking drive space on the Linux environment and monitoring the Linux environment. Chris, I know that you've looked at a few of these tools in the past. There's a lot of tools that are available for the different flavors and distributions of Linux. Do you have any particular recommendation for SUSE? Any tools that we've seen come up that are good? And I think most customers just end up setting up scripts and alerts to run an alert. What's my drive space? And send emails, but
yeah, for me, I've worked previously with a product called Nagios, and that's it's an open source system monitoring tool. You can get plugins that attach into a host machine, be it a Windows machine or even a Linux machine, and then they also have plugins that may have been built by community for SAP HANA itself. But typically, your best action is to give your MSP the SAP HANA client or Studio client to give them that kind of access if they're hands-on into the Windows environment. If they're more like a hands-off MSP, which they basically just kind of get alerts and then they want to trigger to say like, it's running out of disk space or things like that, you can run or you can configure your HANA database alert system so that you can get alerts when there's low disk space being identified, or even using, as I said, a third-party application or a third-party tooling set like Nagios or Zabbix that you could plug into your Linux server. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to system management, even for Windows management. You really, as a Windows administrator, we are so familiar with logging into the operating system. We don't typically rely on third-party solutions for a small environment. For a larger environment, sure, if you have 5, 6, 7 different servers, but if you just have a couple of servers, you're usually logging in directly. And in that respect, I do say that that your MSP should have the skill set for administering Linux. We've also got Google just to help us out, just in case there is any smaller tools that we need to, or questions that we have that we can look up just to do that. But outside of that, if there's any other questions that you might have for me directly, definitely feel free to take it offline with me and just send me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions specifically that might help your MSP give you guys the support that you're looking for.
It's also possible potentially to send MSPs the system status reports so they can get a snapshot view. For MSPs, I think they may be looking for tools. Typically, when they're managing many different customers, they don't want to log into everyone's system every week. They just want to install something and get alerts-based warnings from a remote monitoring tool. Obviously, every MSP is going to have their own tool set that they're working with, and ideally, they're going to want to find something that works with the tool set or the framework that they're working with. So it's really going to be something that has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis if Nagios that Curtis recommended would work with that kind of a tool. But failing that, possibly sending them the system status report and setting up an alert, other kinds of alerts to send information so that they can do some proactive kind of just monitoring and reviews of the system might be a good idea. Okay, thanks. And then there's no other questions. Curtis, can you just click onto the next slide? So what's next? If you have any ideas for any future topics that you want to learn more about, please feel free to reach out. We would like to set up some other webinars in the future. If there's any interest, we're always a good opportunity to reach out and interact with everybody. And the best way to submit those questions would be to submit them to our ticketing system, b1support@aclaris.com. If you have any other questions that come out, things that you specifically want to learn about, if you want us to run you through getting into any of these systems or talk more about backup management or any of the topics we've touched on today or any other things that come up, of course, always the best way to get a hold of us is reaching out to us through our ticket system at b1support@aclaris.com. Right, and I just want to take this opportunity, we're pretty much on time yet, so thank everyone again for joining today. Really appreciate your attention. Oh, there's one more question that came in from Simon here. What would be the cause of this error? RSP instance backup call check table consistency. I'm not familiar with that one. RSP instance backup call check table consistency. I'm not sure if that's a backup error or if that's one of the other maintenance tasks. We may have to take that one offline with you, Simon.
Yeah. Simon, if you come back to it, maybe just try to restart your RSP service that was shown in the video demonstration there. Just try to restart the service, see if you still get the same error. If you do, as Cameron said, just let's take that offline. We can discuss that one.
Yeah, feel free to open a ticket, emailing us. All right. Thank you everyone for your time today. I hope you learned something. And again, the recording will be available to review in the future. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.